we have about 60,000 new condo units scheduled for completion between now and the end of 2025. As you guys are well aware, most of the condo units in Toronto are owned by investors. 82% of the people that bought their units over the past couple of years are at this point cash flow negative. It is a staggering number, and people that are looking at the imminent prospect of having to close on their newly purchased units are not exactly looking forward to this process. In this video, I will talk about the rentability of the condos that are coming up for completion and the impact of all those closings on the real estate market in Toronto. Also in this video, I will talk about the Canadian GDP versus GDP per capita. And I want to give you a little quiz. How many negative consecutive quarters of GDP per capita we had to date? And there are three options: 2, 8, or 5. And the answer is coming up later in the video, so stay tuned. Let's jump directly into the main topic, which is based on a report from Urban Nation from a few days ago titled GTHA Rents Decline for the first time in 3 years. Average condo rents for leases signed during the second quarter in the GTHA decreased 1.2% year over year to $3.97 a square foot, representing the first annual decline since Q2 of 21 when the market was impacted by COVID-19. In and of itself, if you take a average priced condo for rent in Toronto, 1.2% does not represent a significant decline. It's what, $20 or $30, but it's indicative of a trend that the condos for rent under tremendous price pressure at this point. Studios experienced the largest annual decline in rents, decreasing 3.9% to an average of $5.18. Those are the most popular investment grade units. One bedroom rents declined 1.8% from a year ago to an average of $4.14 a square foot, second most popular investment grade unit. And then we're going into a territory where most units are actually owned by end users. Two bedroom rents were down 0.9% annually to an average of $3.54. And then the least popular one with investors is a three bedroom unit where the rents held up the best, decreasing 0.6% from a year ago to an average of $3.83. So what happens with studios is this. Obviously, investors are looking at their performance or the performance on the market from last year, and they're seeing that an average unit was renting out for $2,000. The offers that they're receiving now are coming in at roughly 1.9, so $1,900. And like, okay, let me hold off for a little bit. Maybe I'll get a tenant that'll bring me what I consider to be a fair price, or $2,000. So they opt in favor of waiting for 2 to 3 weeks. So thus they are actually missing out on roughly a month's worth of rent. So 1 month is out. Another problem with new closings is that when a project is nearing completion, people are surging to the market once they close or take possession of the unit. And dozens of units are coming up on the market for lease all at the same time. As I mentioned, more than 50% of all the units in newly completed buildings are going to be owned by investors. So about 50% of them will come up on the market either for lease or for rent, most likely for rent. Again, dozens of units on the market at the same time, and it takes usually months to actually absorb those units and rent them out. So 3 to 4 months are going to be cash flow negative for all of the investors, almost guaranteed, except for the super lucky ones. They will be renting those units out at below market rents, just trying to get the cash flow going. So that's a bit of a problem. And I really hope that most people will opt for closing on the units as opposed to walking away from their obligations. As I mentioned in one of the previous videos, the threshold for builders of where the problems begin for them is at roughly 40%. If 40% of the people decide not to close on the units that they have to close on, then builders will start having problems with paying their mortgage obligations, and those projects is not so good. Regionally, rents in the city of Toronto declined 2.1% annually to an average of $4.10 a square foot. So that's across all types of condo units: studio, 1 bedroom, 2 and 3 bedrooms. While rents in the 905 region of the GTHA increased 2% annually to an average of $3.63 a square foot. So comparatively speaking, people outside of the city of Toronto are doing better with their investment units. The overall decline in condo units occurred despite strong demand during the quarter. The number of condo lease transactions in the GTHA reached a record high of 16,169 units in Q2, increasing 29% annually and rising 60% above the 10-year average. At the same time, however, the total number of condos listed for rent during Q2 increased 47% year over year to 21,695 units. Listings surged last quarter as the number of newly registered condos increased 82% from a year ago to 8,380 units. Most likely will be trending at roughly the same levels as what we're talking about right now. The number of immigrants continuing to come into the country between now and the end of this year is going to be roughly the same, i.e. maybe 600 to 750, 100,000 of newly minted residents. For next year, given the restrictions for temporary visas by the government, that number will decrease. At the same time, we have about 60,000 condos coming up for completion. So, I would project that the market is going to be roughly in the same position next year as it is right now. We are hoping that people are going to be closing on their condos. So they're going to be fulfilling their obligations as they contractually should. For purpose-built rentals completed in the GTHA since 2000, vacancy rates moved up to an 11-quarter high of 2.7%. So that's another indication of the pressure experienced by the rental market. And that happened in Q2 of 2024, edging up from 2.6% in Q1 of 24, so quarter over quarter. And it's a substantial jump from last year, where we had the vacancy rate at 2.2% in the second quarter of 23. The vacancy rate reached 2.8% in the city of Toronto and 2.6% in the 905 region of the GTHA. So that's a quick set of stats for the rentability of the condos that are coming up for completion and the overall snapshot picture of what's happening with the rentals in the GTHA. Now let's move the conversation over to the second topic, which is Canadian GDP versus Canadian GDP per capita, and it is based on the stats released by StatCan at the end of July. And we're going to talk about it through the article on betterdwelling.com titled Canadian GDP Driven by Public Sector Per Capita Recession Deepens, which is a true statement, and it is in stark contradiction to what you would normally hear from the mainstream media outlets. Canada's economy beat expectations, but dive into the details before celebrating. StatCan data shows real gross domestic product grew faster than expected in May. However, even with a rapid public sector expansion driving half the advance, it failed to meet population growth. As a result, Canada's GDP per capita recession printed an 8th consecutive quarter of losses. So going back to the quiz that I've given you guys in the beginning of the video, I've given you 3 options, 2, 8, or 5, and we've printed 8th consecutive quarter of losses for GDP per capita. So the number is 8. It's not looking good at all. We're talking about 2 years after all. Talking about slow boiling of frog. We're getting used to the deteriorating conditions in our lives as Canadians. First, the good news. Canada's real GDP advanced much faster than analysts anticipated. Real GDP grew 0.16% in May, around half the pace seen in April. The monthly advance was significantly larger than StatCan's preliminary estimate of 0.1%. Okay, so it's beat the estimates, which is not so bad. And coincidentally, the same forecast is expected for the upcoming June report. All right, so that's a fairly positive thing that at least for the real GDP, we are in the black. StatCan's estimate shows that 15 out of the 20 major sectors expanded in May. Splitting it into the major categories, the smaller goods is plus 0.4%. Sectors grew much faster than services, which is plus 0.1%. The slowing of the latter is worth emphasizing since it has been driving lofty wage growth, a concern the BOC has expressed. The growth surprise was almost exclusively driven by public sector expansion. Public sector real GDP expanded 0.4% in May, double the rate of the general economy. This is actually not good at all that the growth is mostly fueled by the public sector expansion. It was the 5th consecutive month to advance driven by local, municipal, and regional administration. It's worth emphasizing just how fast this area is growing. It provided a staggering 49% of real GDP growth in the month, an issue often seen in a recession economy. Well, they're dancing around the issue that we are in a recession. We are clearly in a recession in Canada. And, the conclusion of the paragraph says we might not be that far off. We actually quite deep in it. Canada's growth is failing to keep up with the pace of population, and it's getting worse. Indeed, on a per capita basis, GDP declined by 1% in the second quarter. So approximately, we have on a quarterly basis, a threefold disparity between the real GDP and GDP per capita. So either productivity needs to increase quite substantially for the one to catch up with the other, or we need to cut the population growth in a fairly dramatic fashion. And yes, the number of temporary resident visas issued in 25 is going to be smaller than for 24, but I'm not certain that this will allow for the two variables to equalize. Now look at the staggering numbers on this chart. Canada's real GDP per capita recession continues for 8th quarter. Yes, we are in the red. You can think about it like this. So imagine you planning to run a Super Bowl party and you planned it around pizza. So you've invited 12 people over and you asked everybody to RSVP. 6 people out of 12 did RSVP, so you had the expectations set and you decided on the amount of food that you're planning to order. You decided to order a single pizza pie, thinking about splitting it into 6 equal pieces. A few minutes before the event, everybody that didn't answer, people that were missing in action, started showing up. So instead of the expected 6 people, you ended up having 12 people over. So now instead of having 6 slices for everybody, you have to cut the pizza into 12 and everyone gets half the food that they were expecting to get or you were expecting to give them. The exact same thing is happening with the GDP versus GDP per capita. People are having to live with decreasing expectations month after month and quarter after quarter. Slow boiling the frog. This is not good. So something needs to change. Either we need to increase the productivity. This is not something that's going to happen in the near term. We need to curtail the number of people coming to the country. And yes, there is some positive news for 2025. The number of temporary visas issued to people coming into Canada is going to be restricted or restricted as compared to the dramatic population growth we've experienced in the past 3 years. But that's going to trickle down through the layers of the economy over the next perhaps 2 years when we'll see the actual equalization of GDP per capita versus GDP. So there isn't a quick fix for the problems that we're experiencing right now. And things will probably going to continue down the same downward path for the remainder of this year and for the bulk of 25. As you see, guys, the news are not exactly positive when it comes to the real estate market in the GTA. Things are not looking up for condos in Toronto specifically. There is 60,000 units approximately that are scheduled to be completed between now and the end of 25. And some portion of the people that have bought those units are going to be in a position to close. Some will not be able to close, but those that are closing on the units, they've made up their minds, this is the path that they're going to take, will roughly be split into 2 categories. One will try to rent those units out. I'm talking about investors, obviously. And the other half is going to try and sell those units at hopefully the value that is as close to what they've paid when they were signing those contracts with builders. Unfortunately, though, they will not be able to get the same price or anything even close to that. So unless the market turns around, and the only way this could happen that I see is the Bank of Canada might decide to do an emergency rate drop of, say, 75 basis points or 100 basis points, thus bringing us to that caveated territory of between 3.25% for the overnight rate to 3.5% for the overnight rate. Then the market might get revitalized very quickly. I wouldn't hold my breath that this will happen, though. If it doesn't, then the process is actually as slow as what most analysts are predicting. We're going to be in this territory by sometime in the second half of 2025, which I agree with. This is the most likely scenario that will unfold. Then not everybody will be able to hold off until then. In the meantime, the most likely thing that people will try and do, at least that portion of investors that's going to try and sell, is they're going to try and sell at values that are as close to what they've paid for those condo units when they were signing contracts with builders. Unfortunately, the market is not going to help them do that. So, some of the people that will put their properties on the market will be able to survive that first unsuccessful attempt at selling. So 2 or 3 months at a much higher price than what the market can bear. Some will probably be able to survive the second 2 or 3 months before expiry, right? Still trying to get the price that is higher than what the market can bring them. But at some point, they will have to adjust to the market reality. 6 months, unfortunately, if things are unfolding at a slower pace as what we're expecting them to, is just not enough time. You need to be budgeting in about 1.5 years of the continual expense associated with that condo. And if you can't hold that off for that long, you have to sell at the market price. So, for that reason, I suggest that you have a conversation with us. If you are in an unfortunate position where you have to sell and you actually want to be able to extract the most equity out of that sale as possible, get in touch with us. We're including a link in the description below. You can talk to me. My name is Vlad. I'm my partner, Mitra. We're easy to talk to. We'll give you a 15-minute phone consultation and help you make the right decision. If you can hold on to a unit for 1.5 years up until the second part of 25, great. that probably would be the best outcome for you. But if you cannot, you probably need to act fast and you need to act decisively. Well, at any rate, guys, if you like the content, hit the like button. Consider subscribing to the channel. Please engage me in the comment section below. If you have any additional topics that you think I should be covering, please mention it there. I'll be sure to do that. And on this note, I'm planning to see you again next week. I'm out.